After my husband died, my son said, "Mom, your share of the house is worth $5,000, but it was actually worth $7 million. I smiled and asked, "Who's buying it?" When he answered, he realized he'd just tried to scam his own mother. Before we continue, please write in the comments which country you're listening from. Enjoy the story. My name is Dorothy Whitfield, and at 67 years old, I thought I knew everything about my family. I thought I knew my son Marcus, who I'd raised with all the love a mother could give. I thought I knew my late husband Robert, who passed away 6 months ago from a sudden heart attack. But most importantly, I thought they knew me. How wrong we all were. The morning Marcus came to discuss my financial situation was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were always my grocery shopping days, and I was planning to make his favorite pot roast that evening. Even at 35, he still loved coming over for my cooking, bringing his wife Jessica along. Or so I thought. Now I realized they were coming to evaluate what they could take from me. I was sitting in my favorite armchair in the living room, the one Robert bought me for our 25th anniversary. The morning sunlight streamed through the bay windows, illuminating the family photos scattered across the mahogany coffee table. Pictures of Marcus graduating college, our family vacations, Robert and me on our wedding day. A lifetime of memories in our beautiful colonial home. Marcus walked in without knocking, as he'd been doing since the funeral. He had that serious expression he wore when he thought he was handling grown-up business. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his expensive suit impeccable. He looked every inch the successful real estate agent he pretended to be. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, settling into Robert's old recliner without invitation. The sight of him in his father's chair made my chest tighten, but I said nothing. I'd learned long ago that keeping peace in the family meant swallowing my words. "Of course, sweetheart. Would you like some coffee?" I started to rise, but he waved me back down. "This is serious, Mom, about your finances." He pulled out a leather folder, the kind he used for his real estate deals. "I've been looking at Dad's papers, and honestly, your situation is worse than I thought." I felt my heart skip. Since Robert's death, I'd been playing the role of the confused widow, letting Marcus handle the paperwork and phone calls. It seemed easier than dealing with the grief and bureaucracy myself. Robert had always handled our finances, or so everyone believed. "What do you mean, dear?" I asked, clasping my hands in my lap. Marcus opened the folder and spread several documents across the coffee table, covering our family photos. "Mom, I know this is hard to hear, but Dad left you in a really tight spot. The house has a massive mortgage, and there are debts you don't even know about." I leaned forward, peering at the papers with the confusion I'd perfected over 40 years of marriage. "I don't understand all these numbers, Marcus. You know I was never good with money matters." He nodded sympathetically, but I caught something cold in his eyes. "That's why you have me, Mom. I've found a solution, but we need to act fast." He pulled out another document, this one with bold letterhead. "There's a buyer interested in the house. Cash offer, no inspections, quick closing." "Sell the house?" The words came out as a whisper. This house where I'd raised my son, where I'd loved my husband, where every room held precious memories. "I know it's hard, but Mom, you can't afford to keep it. The buyer is offering $5,000 for your share." $5,000. For my share of the house Robert and I had bought 37 years ago. The house I'd watched appreciate in value year after year during my decades as a professional accountant. The house in one of the most desirable neighborhoods in Connecticut. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, but I kept my expression neutral. 5,000? That seems low? Marcus leaned forward, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he'd used since childhood when he wanted something. "Mom, I know it sounds low, but the market is terrible right now. Plus, there are all these liens and debts attached to the property. After everything is settled, $5,000 is actually generous." I stared at the purchase agreement he'd placed in front of me. The buyer's name was listed as MW Holdings LLC. How convenient. "Who's buying it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus shifted in his seat, suddenly unable to meet my eyes. It's an investment company, MW Holdings. They specialize in quick cash purchases for families in distress. MW Holdings, Marcus Whitfield Holdings. My son had created a shell company to buy my house for $5,000, a house worth millions, from his own mother. I looked up at him, this man I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through countless childhood illnesses, supported through college, and bailed out of more scrapes than I could count. This man who was now trying to steal my home. "And you arranged this?" I asked quietly. "I'm just trying to help, Mom. You can't handle all this financial stuff alone. Dad always said you weren't good with numbers." Wasn't good with numbers. Me. Dorothy Whitfield, CPA, who had managed the books for Henderson & Associates accounting firm for 40 years, who had quietly built our family's entire financial portfolio while letting Robert take the credit to preserve his masculine pride. I smiled then, a small, quiet smile that seemed to unnerve Marcus. "That's very thoughtful of you, dear, but I have one question." "What's that?" I leaned back in my chair, still smiling. "Who exactly is MW Holdings?" The color drained from his face. In that moment, Marcus realized he'd just tried to scam his own mother out of $7 million worth of real estate. And worse, he realized I might not be the helpless widow he thought I was. The game was about to change, and for the first time since Robert's funeral, I felt truly alive. Marcus stammered for a moment, his face flushing red. Mom, it's just a company name. These investment firms all have generic names like that." I nodded slowly, as if accepting his explanation, but inside, pieces of a 40-year puzzle were finally clicking into place. You see, I hadn't always been the submissive wife and mother everyone thought they knew. There was a time when Dorothy Whitfield was one of the sharpest financial minds in Connecticut. Let me take you back to 1982, when I first met Robert at a company Christmas party. I was 25, a junior accountant at Henderson & Associates, working my way up in a male-dominated field. I wore my hair in a neat bun, carried a leather briefcase, and could calculate compound interest in my head faster than most people could punch it into a calculator. Robert was charming, handsome, and worked in sales for a medical equipment company. Our courtship was beautiful, traditional. He'd pick me up after work, bring me flowers, tell me how impressed he was that I was so smart with numbers. Back then, he seemed proud of my career. But things changed after we married in 1983. Suddenly, my career became a nice hobby until we started a family. When Marcus was born in 1988, Robert suggested I take some time off to focus on being a mother. "Just temporarily," he said. "The boy needs his mother at home." Temporarily became permanently. Robert's ego couldn't handle having a wife who earned more than he did, who understood investments better than he did, who could spot a bad financial decision from a mile away. So I made a choice that would define the next 40 years of my life. I decided to work from the shadows. I became a bookkeeper for small businesses, working from home while raising Marcus. I told Robert it was just helping out some local shops with their paperwork for pocket money. In reality, I was building a client base, managing portfolios, and quietly accumulating wealth that Robert never knew existed. Every major financial decision our family made, the house, the cars, Marcus's private school education, the vacation home we sold years later, came from recommendations I researched and presented to Robert as suggestions or things I overheard at the grocery store. He'd take the credit, make the final decisions, and everyone believed he was the financial genius behind our comfortable lifestyle. The house we're sitting in right now? I found it. I researched the neighborhood growth potential, analyzed the school district ratings, and calculated the long-term appreciation prospects. Then I casually mentioned to Robert that Mrs. Henderson at the grocery store said houses in Fairfield County were good investments. Robert toured the property, negotiated the price, and signed the papers, but every penny of the down payment came from my secret business account. Marcus's private education at Whitmore Academy? I identified it as the best school in the state, researched their alumni success rates, and calculated the return on investment for his future. Then I told Robert that someone at church mentioned it was where all the successful families send their children. Robert made the calls, attended the interviews, and took credit for securing Marcus's admission, but I paid the tuition from my carefully managed portfolio. Even Marcus's college fund was built from my earnings, invested in carefully chosen stocks and bonds that I monitored daily. When it came time for him to attend Yale, Robert proudly told everyone how his smart investments had paid off. The truth was, every dollar came from the bookkeeping business I'd built while pretending to be just a housewife. But here's the thing about sacrificing your identity for family peace. Eventually, everyone starts believing the lie, including you. For decades, I played the role so well that sometimes I forgot I was acting. I'd sit quietly while Robert explained our financial strategy to friends. I'd nod along when Marcus, even as a child, would roll his eyes at my silly questions about money. Marcus grew up watching his father make all the financial decisions, seeing me defer to Robert on everything from grocery budgets to investment choices. He learned that women, especially mothers, weren't to be trusted with important matters, that we were too emotional, too confused, too weak to handle real responsibility. I enabled this by continuing the charade even as Marcus became an adult. When he struggled to establish his real estate career, I quietly referred clients to him from my business network, letting him believe they found him through his own marketing efforts. When he bought his first house with Jessica, I anonymously provided favorable market analysis that helped them negotiate a better price, which Marcus attributed to his own skill. Even after he married Jessica in 2019, I maintained the facade. Jessica, a woman 20 years younger than me with a marketing degree she'd never used, would often lecture me about modern financial planning and investment strategies, unaware that she was explaining basic concepts to someone who'd been implementing advanced portfolio management for decades. The final sacrifice came during Robert's illness. As he battled the heart condition that would eventually take his life, I managed all our finances while maintaining the appearance that he was still in control. I paid the medical bills, navigated insurance claims, and restructured our investments to ensure his final months were comfortable, all while letting everyone believe Robert was handling everything from his hospital bed. When Robert passed 6 months ago, I should have revealed the truth. I should have stepped forward and reclaimed my identity as the financial architect of our family's success. Instead, I let Marcus take over, partly from grief and partly from 40 years of habit. But watching my own son try to steal from me for $5,000 when he was sitting in a house worth millions that I had purchased, in a neighborhood I had selected, furnished with belongings I had bought. That was the moment I realized my greatest sacrifice hadn't been my career or my recognition. My greatest sacrifice had been teaching my son that his mother was worthless. Now, looking at Marcus squirming in his father's chair, I understood that all those years of playing dumb had created a monster, a man who saw his own mother as prey. But what Marcus didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Dorothy the submissive housewife was just a character I'd played. The real Dorothy Whitfield, the woman who'd built everything he was trying to steal, was about to make her return, and she was going to be very, very expensive. The weeks following that first conversation about MW Holdings were a masterclass in manipulation that would have impressed even the most seasoned con artists. What I witnessed was my own son systematically treating me like a mental invalid while positioning himself as my savior. It started with small things. Marcus began showing up unannounced, using the spare key Robert had given him years ago. He'd walk through my house like he owned it, checking things, moving things, making notes on his phone. When I asked what he was doing, he'd pat my shoulder condescendingly and say, "Just making sure everything's secure, Mom. You can't be too careful living alone." Then came the financial intervention. Marcus convinced me to give him access to what he believed were my bank accounts, the joint checking account Robert and I had shared for household expenses. Of course, He had no idea about my separate business accounts, my investment portfolios, or the safety deposit box containing documents that would make his head spin. "Mom, you've been writing checks to the wrong companies," he announced one morning, spreading my checkbook across the kitchen table like evidence of my incompetence. "Look at this. You paid the electric bill twice last month. And what's this charge for $200 to Whitfield Consulting Services? That sounds like a scam, Mom. You're being taken advantage of." Whitfield Consulting Services was my own business, the one I'd operated quietly for 30 years. The $200 was a small retainer from Mrs. Patterson down the street for helping her organize her late husband's estate. But I just nodded and let Marcus believe I was being swindled. "You're right, dear. I don't understand these financial things. Maybe you should handle the checkbook from now on." His smile was triumphant. "I think that's best, Mom. At least until we get you moved somewhere more manageable." More manageable. As if I were a problem to be solved rather than his mother. Jessica joined the campaign with her own special brand of cruelty. She'd arrive for our weekly dinners wearing designer clothes and jewelry, then spend the evening commenting on how outdated my home was. "Dorothy, you really should consider updating this kitchen," she'd say, running her manicured finger along my perfectly maintained granite countertops. "These cabinets are so 1990s, and honestly, this house is way too big for one person. You're just rattling around in here like a pea in a pod." She'd walk through my living room, picking up my cherished antiques and family heirlooms with obvious distaste. "Marcus, look at all this clutter. Your mom needs to downsize seriously. All this old furniture and these dusty books. When was the last time you read any of these, Dorothy?" Those dusty books included first edition financial texts, investment guides, and accounting manuals I still referenced. But Jessica saw them as junk, and Marcus nodded along with every word she said. The most painful moments came when they discussed me like I wasn't in the room. I'd be serving dinner, and they'd have entire conversations about my situation as if I were deaf. "The house is just too much for her," Jessica would say, cutting her pot roast into tiny pieces. "She can't keep up with the maintenance. Did you see the back patio? There are leaves everywhere." It was November. Of course there were leaves on the patio. "I know," Marcus would reply, "but she's stubborn about moving. Maybe we need to be more firm about it." They'd plan my life over dessert, a nice assisted living facility, maybe something closer to them so they could keep an eye on me. They'd sell the house, invest the money safely for me, make sure I had enough for my simple needs. What they didn't realize was that I was conducting my own investigation into their financial situation. My decades in accounting had taught me how to read between the lines, and the lines in Marcus's life told a very disturbing story. His real estate business was failing, badly. I discovered he hadn't closed a deal in over 8 months. His professional license was under review for what the state board diplomatically called irregular practices. Translation: he'd been lying to clients about property values, just like he was lying to me. But the real revelation came when I followed the digital trail of his spending. Marcus had developed what appeared to be a serious gambling addiction. Online poker, sports betting, cryptocurrency speculation. He was losing thousands of dollars weekly on sites with names like Lucky Strike Casino and Diamond Dreams Sportsbook. The man who was lecturing me about fiscal responsibility owed money to at least 6 different online gambling platforms. His credit cards were maxed out. His mortgage was 3 months behind. The expensive clothes and jewelry he and Jessica flaunted were purchased with borrowed money he had no way to repay. MW Holdings, his shell company designed to steal my house, wasn't just greed. It was desperation. He needed my property to pay off debts that were apparently large enough to attract the attention of some very unpleasant people. I discovered this when I overheard a phone conversation he thought was private. I'd gone upstairs to get him some old photo albums he'd requested, and I heard his voice through the closed guest room door. "I know I'm behind on payments, but I've got a deal closing soon. A big one, $7 million property, and I'll have liquid cash within 2 weeks. No, I understand the interest is accumulating daily. Yes, I know what happens to people who can't pay their debts. $7 million. My house. He wasn't just trying to cheat me. He was planning to use my home to pay off gambling debts to what sounded like very dangerous people. When I came back downstairs with the photo albums, Marcus was all smiles again. Thanks, Mom. Jessica and I were just talking about how we should start going through Dad's things together. You know, help you decide what to keep and what to let go of. Let go of. Like my husband's belongings were just clutter to be disposed of. That night, after they left, I sat in Robert's recliner and looked around my home with new eyes. Every piece of furniture, every painting, every carefully chosen decoration represented a decision I had made, research I had conducted, value I had created. This wasn't just my house, it was my life's work. And my son was planning to steal it all for $5,000 to pay off his gambling debts. The disrespect had reached a level that even my 40-year habit of keeping peace couldn't tolerate. Marcus didn't just see me as incompetent, he saw me as disposable. A problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed, a resource to be exploited. But what Marcus had failed to learn in his 35 years was a simple truth his mother had known since 1982. Never underestimate a woman who's been keeping quiet, especially when she's been keeping quiet because she's been planning. The morning that changed everything was a crisp December Tuesday. I was in my kitchen making coffee when I heard Marcus's key in the front door. But this time, he wasn't alone. Heavy footsteps echoed through my hallway, multiple voices talking in hushed, serious tones. I walked to the living room to find Marcus standing with two men in expensive suits. One was tall and thin with silver hair, the other shorter and stockier with cold, calculating eyes. They had briefcases and official-looking documents spread across my coffee table. "Mom," Marcus said, his voice artificially bright. "Perfect timing. These gentlemen are from MW Holdings. You remember the investment company I told you about? They're here to finalize everything." The taller man extended his hand. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm David Morrison, Senior Acquisition Specialist. We're very excited about this opportunity to help you transition to a more comfortable living situation." I shook his hand, noting the expensive watch, the manicured nails, the way his eyes assessed my home like he was already calculating renovation costs. These weren't just any buyers. These were professionals who specialized in exactly this kind of transaction. "We understand this is emotional," the shorter man added, his voice smooth as silk. "I'm James Carter, and I want you to know we handle these family situations with complete discretion and care." Family situations. As if stealing from elderly widows was just another Tuesday for them. Marcus guided me to my armchair like I was an invalid. "Mom, I know we discussed this, but Mr. Morrison and Mr. Carter have explained that we need to act today. The market window is closing, and if we wait, the offer might be withdrawn." I looked at the documents they'd arranged on my table. Purchase agreement, deed transfer, financial disclosure forms, all professionally prepared, all listing the sale price as $5,000 for my portion of the property. "Your son has explained your financial difficulties," Morrison said, his tone sympathetic. "Mounting medical bills, mortgage arrears, the burden of maintaining such a large property alone. We specialize in helping families in your exact situation." Medical bills? Mortgage arrears? I hadn't had a mortgage payment in 15 years. The house had been paid off completely in 2008, and Robert's medical expenses had been covered entirely by the insurance policies I had researched and purchased years ago. But I played my role. I'm just so confused by all of this. Marcus says it's for the best, but this house, it's all I have left of Robert. "Of course," Carter said, pulling out a tissue box like he'd done this 100 times before. "But Mrs. Whitfield, you have to think practically. Your son has found you a lovely assisted living community just 20 minutes away. You'll have friends, activities, no maintenance worries, and the $5,000 will help with your moving expenses." $5,000 for a house worth $7 million. Moving expenses to an assisted living facility I'd never agreed to research, let alone choose. Marcus knelt beside my chair, taking my hands in his. For a moment, I saw a flash of the little boy I'd raised, and my heart almost broke. Mom, I know this is hard, but Dad would want me to take care of you. He wouldn't want you struggling alone in this big house, worried about money all the time. That was when something inside me snapped. Robert would want Marcus to take care of me? Robert, who had trusted me with every major financial decision we'd ever made? Robert, who in his final days had whispered, "Dorothy, you're the smartest person I've ever known. Take care of yourself after I'm gone." I looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw not my beloved son, but a stranger wearing his face. A stranger who thought so little of his mother that he'd brought professional con artists into her home to help steal her life's work. "I need to read through everything carefully," I said quietly. Morrison checked his expensive watch. "Mrs. Whitfield, I understand your caution, but we have a very tight timeline. Our funding approval expires at 5 p.m. today. If you don't sign now, we'll have to withdraw the offer and move on to other properties." The pressure tactic was so transparent, it was almost insulting. Create urgency, eliminate thinking time, force a decision based on fear rather than logic. It was real estate manipulation 101, and they were using it on a woman they believed was a confused, grieving widow. "Marcus," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "could you get me some water? I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed." "Of course, Mom." He patted my shoulder and headed to the kitchen. The moment he was out of earshot, Morrison's demeanor changed completely. The sympathetic mask dropped, replaced by cold efficiency. "Mrs. Whitfield, let me be frank. Your son owes some very serious people a substantial amount of money. We're offering you a way out of a situation that could become very unpleasant for your entire family." Carter leaned forward. "These aren't the kind of debts that just disappear, ma'am. Your son's gambling problem has attracted attention from people who don't accept payment plans or sob stories. By helping him now, you're helping yourself avoid some very difficult complications." They weren't just con artists. They were connected to Marcus's creditors. This wasn't a simple real estate scam. It was extortion wrapped in legal paperwork. "What kind of complications?" I asked. Morrison's smile was razor-thin. "The kind that involve insurance claims, if you understand my meaning." I understood perfectly. They were threatening my safety, my life, if I didn't cooperate with their theft. Marcus returned with my water, and both men immediately resumed their helpful, professional facades. "Here you go, Mom. Take your time, but remember what Mr. Morrison said about the deadline." I held the glass with shaking hands, but not from fear, from rage. My son had brought criminals into my home. He'd put my life in danger to cover his gambling debts. He'd reduced 40 years of love, sacrifice, and devotion to a $5,000 transaction. "Where do I sign?" I asked. Relief flooded Marcus's face. Morrison and Carter exchanged satisfied glances. They pushed the papers toward me, pointing to signature lines highlighted in yellow. I picked up the pen they provided, a heavy gold instrument that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. I held it over the first signature line, my hand trembling just enough to maintain the illusion of a frightened old woman. Then I set the pen down and looked up at all three men. "Actually, I have one more question," I said, my voice suddenly steady and clear. "Before I sign away my home for $5,000, I'd like to know exactly how much MW Holdings plans to profit from this transaction." The silence in the room was deafening. Morrison cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitfield, that's not really relevant to your situation." "Oh, but it is," I interrupted, and for the first time in months, I let my real voice show through, the voice of a woman who'd spent 40 years managing complex financial transactions. "You see, gentlemen, I may be a grieving widow, but I'm not a stupid one, and I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what's really happening here." I stood up from my chair, and something in my posture must have changed because all three men suddenly looked uncertain. Marcus, I said, looking directly at my son, would you like to explain to these gentlemen exactly who they're trying to steal from? Or shall I? The color drained from Marcus's face as the three men stared at me. Morrison and Carter exchanged nervous glances, clearly not expecting this shift in the conversation. But I wasn't ready to reveal everything yet. I needed to understand exactly who I was dealing with first. Gentlemen, I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said, setting the unsigned papers aside. Would you mind giving me 24 hours to consult with my attorney before making such a significant decision? Morrison's jaw tightened. Mrs. Whitfield, as I explained, our timeline doesn't allow for delays. Then I'm afraid we don't have a deal. I walked to the front door and opened it. Thank you for your time. Carter started to object, but something in my demeanor must have warned him off. After 40 years of managing difficult clients and complex negotiations, I knew how to project quiet authority when needed. Mom, what are you doing? Marcus hissed as the two men reluctantly gathered their papers. Making an informed decision, dear, something your father always taught you to do. After Morrison and Carter left, Marcus paced my living room like a caged animal. Mom, you don't understand. These people don't wait. They need an answer now. Then they'll have to be disappointed. I sat back down in my armchair, studying my son's frantic expression. Marcus, sit down. We need to talk. There's nothing to talk about. Mom, you're making a huge mistake. These guys aren't going to just go away. I'm sure they're not. But before I sign anything, I'm going to do something I should have done 6 months ago. I reached for my purse and pulled out my phone. I'm going to call Harold Patterson. Marcus froze. Who? Harold Patterson, Robert's attorney. You remember Harold? He handled your father's will? Of course, Marcus remembered Harold. What he didn't know was that Harold had been my attorney first, long before he'd ever represented Robert. Harold had helped me structure my business, set up my investment accounts, and create the legal framework that protected my assets while maintaining the fiction that Robert was our family's financial head. The next morning, I drove to Harold's office downtown. At 72, Harold Patterson was still one of the sharpest legal minds in Connecticut. His silver hair and kind eyes had put clients at ease for 5 decades. But beneath that grandfatherly exterior was a lawyer who'd never lost a case that mattered. Dorothy, he said, embracing me warmly. I've been wondering when you'd come to see me. How are you holding up? I've been better, Harold. I need your help with something rather urgent. I explained the situation with Marcus and MW Holdings, watching Harold's expression grow darker with each detail. Dorothy, this is extortion, he said finally. And what your son is attempting is fraud. You understand that, don't you? I'm beginning to. But Harold, I need to know exactly where I stand legally. It's time to stop pretending I don't understand my own finances. Harold smiled grimly and pulled out a thick file folder. I've been waiting 30 years for you to say those words. What he showed me over the next 2 hours changed everything. The house that Marcus was trying to sell for $5,000? It was titled in my name alone, purchased entirely with funds from my personal business account in 1986. Robert's name had been added to the deed later for estate planning purposes, but I remained the primary owner. The massive mortgage Marcus claimed existed, paid off in full in 2008 using proceeds from my consulting business. The mounting debts that supposedly threatened my security, non-existent. In fact, our family had no debt whatsoever and hadn't for over 15 years. But the real revelation came when Harold showed me the current value of my investment portfolio. Dorothy, when we last spoke before Robert's passing, your various accounts totaled approximately $1.8 million. With the market performance over the past 6 months, you're now sitting at just over $2.1 million in liquid assets. $2.1 million. Money I'd earned, invested, and managed while everyone believed I couldn't balance a checkbook. And that doesn't include the real estate, Harold continued, pulling out property assessments. Your primary residence is currently valued at $7.2 million. The vacation property you and Robert sold in 2019 generated $1.4 million in profit, which you wisely reinvested. And then there are the commercial properties. Commercial properties? Harold looked surprised. Dorothy, you own 3 small office buildings in downtown Fairfield, don't you remember? We purchased them through Whitfield Holdings in 1995, 1998, and 2002. They generate approximately $45,000 in rental income annually. I did remember, vaguely. Investments I'd made during particularly profitable years. Holdings I'd created to diversify my portfolio. But in my grief and the chaos following Robert's death, I'd lost track of just how extensive my financial empire had become. Harold, what's the total picture? He opened a calculator and worked for several minutes. Conservative estimate, including real estate, investments, business holdings, and liquid assets? Dorothy, you're worth approximately $12 million. $12 million. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this information. While I'd been playing the role of confused widow, grieving over $5,000, I was actually one of the wealthiest women in Fairfield County. There's something else, Harold said gently. The power of attorney Robert signed before his death? It names you as his sole legal representative. But more importantly, the trust documents we created 15 years ago make you the sole trustee and beneficiary of the Whitfield Family Trust. Marcus has no legal claim to any of your assets unless you choose to give them to him. What about Robert's will? Robert's personal assets, his clothes, his watch, his car, those go to Marcus as specified. But everything else, everything that matters, legally belongs to you and always has. Robert was essentially living off your wealth for the past 20 years, though he never fully understood that. I thought about Marcus's desperate attempts to steal what he believed was his inheritance. The truth was, there was no inheritance. Everything he thought belonged to his father actually belonged to me. Harold, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to research MW Holdings and these men who visited me yesterday, David Morrison and James Carter. I want to know exactly who they are and who they work for. Harold made notes on a legal pad. I'll have a full report by tomorrow, but Dorothy, I have to ask, what are you planning? I stood up and shook his hand. I'm planning to remind my son who his mother really is. That evening, I sat in my $7 million home, surrounded by furnishings I'd purchased with money I'd earned, looking at photo albums filled with memories I'd created and paid for. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt like myself again. Dorothy Whitfield, CPA. Dorothy Whitfield, successful businesswoman. Dorothy Whitfield, who had built a $12 million fortune while letting everyone believe she was just a housewife. My phone rang. Marcus. Mom, have you thought about what we discussed yesterday? Those guys are getting impatient. I've thought about it quite a lot, actually, I said. Marcus, tomorrow I'd like you to come over. There are some things we need to discuss about the family finances. Great. So you're ready to sign the papers? Oh, I'm ready for something, I said. But it might not be what you're expecting. After I hung up, I walked through my house with new eyes. Every room represented a decision I'd made, an investment I'd calculated, a future I'd planned. This wasn't just my home. It was the physical manifestation of 4 decades of financial expertise. And tomorrow, I was going to teach my son the most expensive lesson of his life. Harold called me at 8 a.m. sharp the next morning with information that made my blood run cold. Dorothy, you need to hear this. MW Holdings isn't just a shell company. It's connected to a network of businesses that specialize in elder financial abuse. Morrison and Carter aren't just con artists. They're part of a sophisticated operation that targets wealthy widows. I gripped the phone tighter. How sophisticated? They research recent obituaries, identify widows with substantial assets, then work with family members who have gambling debts or financial problems. They've done this at least 12 times in the past 3 years. The pattern is always the same: pressure, intimidation, and legal documents that look official but are essentially theft. What happened to the other families? Harold's pause told me everything. Dorothy, 3 of those widows are now living in state-funded nursing homes after signing over properties worth millions for a few $1,000s. One woman in Greenwich lost a $12 million estate for $5,000 to pay her son's cocaine debts. My son wasn't just gambling with his own future. He was gambling with mine. And he'd brought professionals who specialized in destroying families like ours. There's more, Harold continued. I did some digging into Marcus's situation. His gambling debts aren't just to online casinos. He owes $230,000 to a loan shark operation run by the Castellano family. These are people who break legs first and ask questions later. The Castellanos. Even I'd heard of them. A crime family that had expanded from traditional mob activities into high-end financial fraud. Marcus hadn't just developed a gambling problem. He'd gotten involved with organized crime. Harold, if I don't cooperate, what happens to Marcus? Honestly, best case scenario, they take everything he owns and ruin his credit permanently. Worst case, Harold didn't need to finish. And if I do cooperate, you lose everything you've worked for, and they'll be back for more within a year. Dorothy, these people don't stop at one score. Once they know you're vulnerable, they'll bleed you dry. After hanging up with Harold, I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee and planning the most important strategy session of my life. I had less than 24 hours before Marcus arrived, expecting me to sign away my home. I needed allies, information, and a plan that would protect both my son and my assets. My first call was to Detective Sarah Chen at the Connecticut State Police Financial Crimes Unit. Sarah and I had worked together years ago when I'd helped investigate embezzlement at a client's company. She owed me a favor, and it was time to collect. Dorothy Whitfield, I haven't heard from you in years. How's retirement treating you? Complicated, Sarah. I need your help with something involving elder fraud and organized crime. I'm listening. I explained the situation with MW Holdings, the Castellano connection, and Marcus's involvement. Sarah whistled low. Dorothy, you've stumbled into something we've been investigating for months. We know about Morrison and Carter, but we haven't been able to get close enough to build a case. Would you be willing to wear a wire? A wire? Sarah, I'm 67 years old. And you're also one of the smartest financial minds I've ever worked with. Dorothy, these people have stolen millions from elderly victims. You could help us shut them down permanently. The idea terrified me, but the thought of other families going through what we were experiencing made my decision easy. What do you need me to do? Let them think they're winning. Set up a meeting to sign the papers, but this time we'll be listening to every word. We need them to admit on tape that they're defrauding you and threatening your family. My second call was to Rebecca Martinez, a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes. Rebecca had helped me track down stolen assets for clients over the years, and her discretion was absolute. Mrs. Whitfield, good to hear from you. What can I do for you? Rebecca, I need a complete background check on my son. Financial records, recent activities, associates, everything. And I need it by tonight. That's a tight timeline, but for you, I'll make it happen. Anything specific I should look for? Gambling activities, debt obligations, and any connections to organized crime. And Rebecca? This is personal. Understood. I'll have everything by 6 p.m. My third call was the hardest. I dialed my old business partner, Margaret Thompson, now retired, but still one of the most connected financial professionals in the state. Dorothy, sweetheart, how are you managing? I'm managing by getting back to work, Margaret. I need a favor. Anything. I need you to help me liquidate some assets quickly, but quietly. Nothing that would attract attention, but I want to have cash available if I need it. How much cash? About $500,000. Margaret didn't even pause. I can have that arranged by tomorrow afternoon. Dorothy, are you in some kind of trouble? I'm in the kind of trouble that requires me to remember who I used to be. By afternoon, I had transformed my dining room into a command center. Rebecca's report on Marcus made for disturbing reading. His gambling had started small 3 years ago, but had escalated dramatically after Robert's death. Online poker, sports betting, cryptocurrency speculation. He was losing an average of $15,000 per month. But the real shock was discovering he'd been stealing from his real estate clients. Marcus had been skimming money from escrow accounts, using client deposits to fund his gambling, then scrambling to replace the money before closings. It was a classic Ponzi scheme that was about to collapse. The Connecticut Real Estate Commission had been investigating him for 2 months. His license suspension wasn't pending. It was inevitable. Within weeks, Marcus would lose his career, his income, and quite possibly his freedom. No wonder he was desperate enough to steal from his own mother. Detective Chen arrived at 5 p.m. to fit me with a recording device so small it looked like a button on my cardigan. We rehearsed various scenarios, planning how to get Morrison and Carter to incriminate themselves on tape. Remember, Dorothy, we need them to admit they're pressuring you, that they know the property is worth more than they're paying, and that they've threatened your family. Can you handle that? Detective, I've been negotiating complex financial deals since before you were born. I think I can handle 2 small-time crooks. At 6 p.m., Harold arrived with additional legal documents and a briefcase full of evidence. At 7 p.m., Rebecca delivered her final report along with financial records that painted a complete picture of Marcus's downward spiral. By 8 p.m., I was ready. Marcus called at 8:30. Mom, I'm coming over tomorrow at 10 a.m. with Morrison and Carter. Are you ready to finalize everything? Yes, dear, I said, my voice perfectly calm. I'm ready to finalize everything. What Marcus didn't know was that everything included FBI agents positioned around my house, recording equipment that would capture every word, and a strategy that would either save my son or send him to prison. I spent that evening reviewing 40 years of financial documents, preparing for the most important negotiation of my life. By midnight, I had everything organized: bank statements, property deeds, investment records, and business licenses that proved exactly who Dorothy Whitfield really was. As I finally went to bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Robert's death: excitement. Tomorrow, I would stop being a victim and start being myself again. Tomorrow, Dorothy Whitfield, CPA, was coming out of retirement, and she was going to be very expensive for anyone foolish enough to underestimate her. At exactly 10 a.m., Marcus arrived with Morrison and Carter in tow. This time, however, I was ready for them. I dressed carefully, a navy blue business suit I hadn't worn since my consulting days, my hair pulled back in a professional chignon, and my late mother's pearl earrings for confidence. The recording device Detective Chen had given me felt heavy against my chest, a constant reminder that every word spoken in my living room would be preserved as evidence. Good morning, Mom, Marcus said, kissing my cheek. You look different today. Do I? Perhaps it's because I slept well last night. Amazing what a little clarity can do for one's appearance. Morrison and Carter entered with their usual briefcases and confident smiles, but I noticed they seemed more tense than during their previous visit. They'd probably expected this to be wrapped up by now. Mrs. Whitfield, Morrison said, extending his hand. I trust you've had time to consider our offer. Oh, I've considered it very carefully, I replied, gesturing for them to sit. In fact, I've spent considerable time reviewing all the documentation you provided. I walked to my dining room and returned with a stack of papers, my own research, Harold's legal analysis, and Rebecca's investigation report. I set them down on the coffee table with deliberate precision. Before we proceed, gentlemen, I have some questions. Carter shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Whitfield, we've answered all your questions. Our timeline really doesn't allow for... Your timeline, I interrupted, my voice suddenly sharp, is not my concern. This is my house, and I will take whatever time I need to understand exactly what you're proposing. The room went silent. Marcus stared at me like I'd grown a second head. In 40 years, he'd never heard his mother speak with such authority. Now then, I continued, picking up the MW Holdings purchase agreement. This document states that you're purchasing my portion of this property for $5,000. Could you please explain exactly what constitutes my portion? Morrison cleared his throat. Well, as we discussed, after accounting for the mortgage, liens, and outstanding debts, I'm going to stop you right there, I said, raising my hand. There is no mortgage on this property. There are no liens. There are no outstanding debts, so I'll ask again. What exactly is my portion of a property I own outright? The color drained from Carter's face. Marcus looked confused. Mom, that can't be right. Dad always said... Your father said many things, Marcus. But the legal reality is quite different. I pulled out the property deed Harold had prepared. This house is titled in my name. It was purchased with funds from my personal business account in 1986. Your father's name was added later for estate planning purposes, but I have always been the primary owner. I handed Marcus the deed. He stared at it like it was written in a foreign language. Furthermore, I continued, enjoying the shocked silence, I had a very interesting conversation with a property appraiser yesterday. Would you gentlemen like to know what this house is actually worth? Mrs. Whitfield, Morrison said, his professional demeanor cracking. Property values are highly subjective. $7.2 million. I let that number hang in the air. That's the current market value of this property, according to Henderson and Associates Real Estate Appraisal Services, the same firm that's been valuing properties in this neighborhood for 30 years. Marcus's mouth fell open. 7 million? That's correct. So imagine my surprise when you brought me an offer to purchase my $7 million house for $5,000. That's approximately 0.7% of its actual value. In the financial world, we have a term for that kind of transaction. I paused for effect, looking directly at Morrison and Carter. We call it fraud. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Carter started to speak, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. You see, I also had some research done on MW Holdings. Fascinating company history. 12 similar transactions in the past 3 years, all involving elderly widows, all involving properties sold for a fraction of their actual value. Tell me, gentlemen, how many other families have you destroyed with this particular business model? Morrison stood up abruptly. Mrs. Whitfield, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Sit down, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. We're not done talking. Something in my tone made him comply immediately. This was the voice I'd used in boardrooms for 40 years, the voice that had closed million-dollar deals and faced down hostile audits. It was a voice that commanded respect. Marcus, I said, turning to my son, would you like to explain to these gentlemen exactly how much money you owe their associates? My son's face went white. Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. $230,000, I said flatly. To loan sharks connected to the Castellano crime family. Money you lost gambling online while stealing from your real estate clients' escrow accounts. The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus looked like he might be sick. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you honestly believe that a woman who managed complex financial portfolios for 40 years wouldn't notice her own son was involved with organized crime? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood I'd researched and chosen so carefully decades ago. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my back still to the room. Mr. Morrison and Mr. Carter are going to leave my house immediately and never return. They're going to inform their associates that Dorothy Whitfield is not available for exploitation. I turned back to face them. And if anyone connected to your operation contacts my family again, I will personally ensure that the Connecticut State Police Financial Crimes Unit receives every piece of evidence I've gathered about your activities. Morrison and Carter exchanged nervous glances. They clearly hadn't expected to encounter a victim who fought back with such precision. Furthermore, I continued, Marcus is going to check himself into a gambling addiction treatment program immediately. He's going to surrender his real estate license voluntarily before the state revokes it, and he's going to tell me exactly how this scheme was supposed to work. Mom, Marcus whispered, you don't understand. These people, if I don't pay them... What? They'll hurt you? They'll hurt me? I walked back to my chair and sat down, crossing my legs with calm confidence. Marcus, let me explain something to you about leverage. I picked up another document from my stack, Rebecca's financial report on the Castellano organization. The Castellanos make their money from fear and intimidation, but their entire operation depends on staying under law enforcement radar. The last thing they want is attention from federal investigators. I looked directly at Morrison. Tell me, how much do you think your associates would appreciate knowing that their debt collection efforts are being recorded by the FBI? Morrison's face went ashen. Carter started to stand again, but I shook my head. I said we weren't finished. You see, gentlemen, while you've been planning to steal my house, I've been planning something much more comprehensive. I've been planning to take your entire operation down. I reached into my cardigan and pulled out the recording device, setting it on the coffee table where everyone could see it. Every word spoken in this room for the past 20 minutes has been transmitted directly to Detective Sarah Chen at the Connecticut State Police, including your admission that you've done this to other families, your knowledge that the property is worth far more than you're offering, and your threats about what happens if we don't cooperate. The room erupted. Morrison and Carter jumped to their feet. Marcus started babbling about not knowing about any recording, and I sat calmly in my chair, watching 40 years of suppressed authority finally emerge. The FBI will be very interested in your business model, I said over the chaos, as will the IRS, the Connecticut Real Estate Commission, and several federal agencies that investigate elder abuse. Morrison was backing toward the door. This is entrapment. You can't. I can, and I have. I stood up one final time, walking to the front door and opening it. Gentlemen, you have 60 seconds to leave my property before I call the police to have you arrested for trespassing. They practically ran to their car, briefcases forgotten in their haste to escape. Marcus remained in his father's chair, staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Mom, he said finally, who are you? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and apparently failed to teach the most basic lessons about respect and honesty. I'm Dorothy Whitfield, I said simply. I'm a certified public accountant with 40 years of experience. I'm a successful businesswoman who built a multi-million-dollar portfolio while pretending to be helpless. And I'm your mother, who loves you enough to save you from yourself. I sat back down and folded my hands in my lap. But most importantly, Marcus, I'm a woman who's done being underestimated by anyone, including you. Marcus sat in stunned silence for nearly 5 minutes after Morrison and Carter fled. I could see his mind racing, trying to reconcile the mother he thought he knew with the woman who had just dismantled a criminal operation in her living room. This is impossible, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. You can't be. Mom, you've never even balanced your own checkbook. I've been balancing checkbooks since before you were born, Marcus. I just let you and your father believe I couldn't. He stood up abruptly, pacing across the room like a trapped animal. No, this doesn't make sense. Dad handled all our finances. He made all the investment decisions. He bought this house. Your father was a wonderful man, but he couldn't have afforded this house on his medical equipment sales salary. Every major financial decision our family ever made was based on research I conducted and money I earned. Marcus stopped pacing and stared at me. You're lying. Am I? I walked to my dining room and returned with a thick folder Harold had prepared. Bank statements dating back to 1983, investment records, business licenses, property purchase agreements, all in my name, all funded by my accounts. I spread the documents across the coffee table, the same space where Marcus had tried to trick me into signing away my fortune just an hour ago. Your private school tuition at Whitmore Academy? Paid for my business account, your college expenses at Yale, my money, the seed capital for your real estate business, a loan from me that you never repaid. Each revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. I could see his entire understanding of our family history crumbling. Even this house, Marcus. Do you remember when we moved here in 1986? You were 8 years old, so excited about your new bedroom, the big backyard, the swimming pool. He nodded, still in shock. Your father told everyone he'd gotten a promotion that made the house affordable. The truth is, I'd just landed 3 major corporate clients for my bookkeeping business. I found this house, negotiated the purchase price, and provided the entire down payment. Marcus slumped back into his father's chair. Why? Why would you lie about all this for so long? Because your father needed to feel like the provider. Because the world wasn't ready for women who earned more than their husbands. Because keeping peace in the family seemed more important than getting credit for my accomplishments. I sat down across from him, trying to reach the little boy I'd raised somewhere inside this desperate man. But mostly, Marcus, because I loved you both enough to let you believe what you needed to believe. Mom. That's when his shock turned to anger. You let me make a fool of myself, he exploded, jumping to his feet. All those years listening to you ask Dad about basic financial stuff, watching you pretend to be confused by investment statements, acting like you needed help with simple math problems. You were lying to me. I was protecting your father's pride and your image of him. By making me think my mother was an idiot? His voice was rising, filled with a rage I'd never seen before. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was, having friends over and watching you act helpless about money? Jessica used to laugh about how clueless you were. The mention of Jessica sparked something cold in my chest. And where is Jessica now, Marcus? Shouldn't your wife be here supporting you through this crisis? His face flushed red. She doesn't know about the gambling. She thinks I'm handling a big real estate deal. She doesn't know her husband is about to lose his license? That you've stolen money from clients? That you owe $250,000 to loan sharks? She doesn't need to know. But she needs to know that your supposedly clueless mother owns a $7 million house that you were planning to steal? Marcus began pacing again, his movements becoming more agitated. This is insane. This whole thing is insane. You can't just change everything like this. I haven't changed anything, Marcus. I've simply stopped pretending. Well, maybe you should start pretending again, he shouted. Maybe some things are better left the way they were. I stood up slowly, and something in my posture made him step back. Are you suggesting I should have let Morrison and Carter steal my house? Should I have signed those papers and moved into an assisted living facility so you could pay off your gambling debts? I was going to take care of you. With what money, Marcus? You're bankrupt. Your business is collapsing. You've been stealing from clients to fund your addiction. Exactly how were you planning to take care of me? He had no answer for that, so he changed tactics. Mom, you don't understand the kind of people I owe money to. They're not going to just forget about this because you scared off Morrison and Carter. They want their money, and if I can't pay... They'll what? Come after me? Come after you? I walked to the window again, looking out at the peaceful neighborhood I'd chosen so carefully. Marcus, let me explain something about bullies. They only have power if you're afraid of them. These aren't schoolyard bullies, Mom. These are serious criminals. I know exactly what they are. I also know that serious criminals don't want attention from federal law enforcement agencies. And I know that they have far more to lose from a public investigation than we do. I turned back to face him. The question is, what are you willing to do to fix this situation? What do you mean? I mean, are you ready to admit you have a gambling problem? Are you ready to get professional help? Are you ready to surrender your real estate license before they revoke it and pursue criminal charges? Marcus's face went white. Criminal charges? Marcus, you've been stealing from client escrow accounts. That's embezzlement. It's a felony. The only reason you're not already in jail is because I convinced Detective Chen to let you cooperate voluntarily. Detective Chen? You called the police on me? I called the police on Morrison and Carter. You became involved when they mentioned you owe money to organized crime figures. The full weight of his situation seemed to hit Marcus all at once. He collapsed back into the chair, his head in his hands. This can't be happening. This can't be real. It's very real. But Marcus, it's not too late to fix this. I can help you, but only if you're honest with me and honest with yourself. He looked up at me with desperate eyes. How? How can you possibly help with this? I have resources you don't know about. I have connections you can't imagine. I have 40 years of experience handling complex financial problems. I sat down across from him again. But first, you need to call Jessica and tell her the truth. All of it. I can't. She'll leave me. Maybe. Or maybe she'll surprise you. But Marcus, your marriage is built on the same lies that our family has been built on for years. It's time for everyone to start living in reality. He stared at me for a long moment. Who are you? I mean, really, who are you? I'm the woman who earned the money that bought everything you've ever taken for granted. I'm the woman who researched the schools that educated you, the neighborhoods that shaped you, the opportunities that launched your career. I leaned forward. I'm also the woman who loves you enough to let you hate me if that's what it takes to save your life. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, processing everything I'd revealed. When he finally spoke, his voice was small and broken. Mom, I'm scared. For the first time since this nightmare began, I heard my little boy in his voice. The child who used to run to me when he had nightmares, who trusted me to fix everything that went wrong in his world. I know you are, sweetheart, but you're not alone in this. You never were. I reached across and took his hand. But Marcus, the scared little boy who needs his mother to fix everything, he needs to grow up. The man who thought he could steal from his own mother to pay gambling debts, he needs to disappear. I squeezed his hand gently. The question is, who do you want to be when this is over? Marcus looked at our joined hands, then back at my face. For the first time in months, I saw something other than desperation in his eyes. I saw the possibility of hope. The next 3 hours changed everything between Marcus and me forever. I made coffee while he called Jessica. I could hear her voice through the phone, growing louder and more shrill as Marcus confessed the truth about his gambling, his business failures, and his debts. When he reached the part about trying to steal my house, there was a long silence, followed by the sound of the line going dead. She hung up, Marcus said quietly, staring at the phone. Give her time to process. This is a lot to absorb. She's not coming back, Mom. Jessica married me because she thought I was successful, because she thought our family had money. When she finds out the truth, then you'll know whether she loved Marcus or loved the idea of Marcus. He set the phone down and looked at me with hollow eyes. What happens now? Now, you're going to see exactly who your mother really is. I walked to my home office and returned with a briefcase I hadn't opened in 6 months. Inside were documents that would either save my son or destroy the last illusions between us. Marcus, I want you to look at something. I spread out bank statements, investment portfolios, and business records across the coffee table. But these weren't the documents Harold had shown me yesterday. These were different, older, more comprehensive, more shocking. What am I looking at? The complete financial picture of our family. Not just my assets, but everything Robert and I built together. Everything I've been managing alone since his death. Marcus picked up a portfolio statement dated from the previous month. His eyes widened as he scanned the numbers. Mom, this says you have over $2 million in investment accounts alone. That's correct. He picked up another document. And this one shows rental income from commercial properties. Mom, you own office buildings. 3 of them in downtown Fairfield. They generate about $45,000 annually in rental income. Marcus was shuffling through papers now, his hands shaking. This property assessment, it shows land holdings in Vermont, 40 acres? A development project I invested in 20 years ago. It's worth approximately $800,000 now. And this? He held up a business license. Whitfield Financial Consulting Services, active since 1985. Mom, you've been running a consulting business for almost 40 years? I have. My clients include 3 small banks, several local businesses, and 12 private families who trust me to manage their portfolios. Marcus set down the papers and stared at me. How much? How much is everything worth? I had Harold's calculation memorized. Approximately $12 million. The number hung in the air between us like a physical presence. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again without making a sound. 12 million. That's a conservative estimate. It could be more, depending on market conditions. Marcus stood up abruptly and began pacing again, but this time his movements were different. Not frantic or desperate, but almost mechanical, like a man trying to process information his brain couldn't accept. This is impossible. If you had $12 million, why did you let Dad work so hard? Why did we live so normally? Because having money and flaunting money are two different things. Because your father needed to feel useful, needed to feel like he was providing for his family. Because I believed that family harmony was more important than personal recognition. But we could have, what? Had a bigger house? Expensive cars? Taken lavish vacations? I shook my head. Marcus, we had everything that mattered. We had love, security, and opportunity. What more did we need? He stopped pacing and looked at me with something approaching awe. You've been hiding this my entire life. I've been protecting this my entire life. There's a difference. Protecting it from what? From people who might try to take it. From family members who might become entitled or careless with money they didn't earn. From a world that often punishes successful women. I walked to the window again, looking out at the neighborhood that had been my sanctuary for 37 years. And apparently, I was right to be cautious. The words hit Marcus like a slap. He sank back into his father's chair, finally understanding the full scope of what he'd attempted. Oh God, oh my God, Mom. I tried to steal $12 million from you for $5,000. You tried to steal everything I've worked for to pay gambling debts you created through your own poor choices. I didn't know. If I had known, would it have mattered? I turned back to face him. If you'd known I was wealthy, would you have simply asked for the money instead of trying to trick me out of it? Would you have been honest about your problems instead of bringing criminals into my home? Marcus had no answer for that, and we both knew why. The truth was, if he'd known about my wealth, he might have felt even more entitled to it. The most heartbreaking part, I continued, is that if you had simply told me the truth 6 months ago, I would have helped you. If you'd admitted you had a gambling problem, admitted you were in financial trouble, admitted you needed guidance, I would have moved heaven and earth to save you. Tears were streaming down Marcus's face now. I was ashamed. I was so ashamed, Mom. Dad always talked about being responsible with money, about being a man who takes care of his family. I felt like such a failure. So you decided the solution was to steal from the woman who gave you life? I thought you didn't have anything to lose. I thought Dad had left you with almost nothing, and $5,000 would be enough for you to live simply somewhere smaller. You thought I was worthless. The words hung between us like an accusation. Marcus flinched as if I'd struck him. I didn't. Marcus, for the past 6 months, you've treated me like an incompetent child. You've made financial decisions for me without consulting me. You've dismissed my opinions, ignored my concerns, and assumed I was too stupid to understand my own situation. I walked back to my chair and sat down, looking directly at my son. You brought criminals into my home to help you steal from me. You were willing to let me lose everything I've worked for so you could continue gambling with money you don't have. Mom, please. I'm not finished. My voice was steady, but I could feel 40 years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. The saddest part is that you learned this behavior from watching how your father and I interacted. You learned that women, especially mothers, exist to sacrifice for men. You learned that maternal love means never saying no, never standing up for yourself, never demanding respect. Marcus was sobbing now, great heaving gasps that shook his entire body. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't want to hurt you. But you did hurt me. You hurt me in ways that have nothing to do with money. I leaned forward, my voice softening slightly. Marcus, do you understand what you've lost? Not financially, emotionally. Do you understand what you've done to our relationship? He looked up at me through his tears. I've ruined everything. You've certainly tried to. I sat back in my chair. The question now is whether you're willing to do the work necessary to rebuild the trust you've destroyed. How? How could you ever trust me again after this? That remains to be seen. But it starts with you checking yourself into a gambling addiction treatment program tomorrow morning. It continues with you surrendering your real estate license and cooperating fully with the state investigation into your business practices. I picked up one of the financial documents from the table. And Marcus, it means accepting that the little boy who thought his mommy would fix all his problems is gone forever. From now on, you're dealing with Dorothy Whitfield, CPA. You're dealing with a businesswoman who has 12 million reasons to protect herself. Marcus wiped his eyes and looked at me with something that might have been respect for the first time in his adult life. What about the people I owe money to? What about the Castellanos? I smiled then, and something in that smile must have reminded him of the mother who used to solve all his childhood problems. Marcus, let me tell you something about having $12 million. It comes with certain advantages. I reached for my phone. I think it's time you met some of my business associates. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the same chair where this story began, but everything else has changed completely. Marcus completed a 90-day residential gambling addiction program at the best facility money could buy. Not his money, mine. But unlike every other time I'd helped him, this came with conditions that would have made his father proud. He surrendered his real estate license voluntarily, cooperated fully with the state investigation, and agreed to make restitution to every client he'd stolen from. The total was $112,000, which I paid directly to the victims while Marcus signed legal documents acknowledging the debt to me. As for the Castellanos and their $230,000 problem, that was resolved with a single phone call to my attorney Harold, who contacted federal authorities already investigating the organization. Suddenly, Marcus's debt became evidence in a federal racketeering case, and the people who'd been threatening my family found themselves under federal surveillance. It's amazing how quickly dangerous criminals lose interest in small-time debtors when FBI agents start asking questions about their business practices. Morrison and Carter? They're currently awaiting trial on federal charges of elder fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy. Their operation, which had victimized dozens of families across 3 states, was completely dismantled. Detective Chen sent me a thank you note, telling me that my recorded conversations provided the evidence they needed to protect countless other families. But the most significant change has been in my relationship with Marcus. The man who walks through my front door now, using the doorbell first, like a civilized adult, is someone I barely recognize. Gone is the entitled, desperate person who tried to steal my house. In his place is a son who looks me in the eye when he speaks, who asks permission before making himself coffee, who calls me Mom with a respect I haven't heard since he was a child. "How are you feeling today?" he asks, settling into the chair that's no longer Dad's chair, but simply another piece of furniture in my home. "I'm feeling like myself," I tell him. For the first time in 40 years, I'm feeling completely like myself. Marcus has been attending therapy twice a week, not just for gambling addiction, but for what his counselor calls financial trauma, the psychological damage caused by growing up in a family where money was simultaneously abundant and secret, where love was expressed through financial sacrifice that was never acknowledged. "Dr. Peterson wants to know if you'd be willing to attend a session with me," he says, "to talk about everything." "I'd be happy to. But Marcus, I want you to understand something first." He nods, giving me his full attention in a way he hasn't done since childhood. "I'm not the same woman who used to pretend she couldn't balance a checkbook. I'm not going to go back to hiding my intelligence or my success to make other people comfortable. If that's difficult for you to accept, we need to address it directly. I know, and Mom, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, and I'm ashamed that it took almost losing you for me to see it. The man sitting across from me has learned to live on the salary from his new job as a bookkeeper at a small accounting firm, a position I helped him secure through my professional network, but which he earned through his own efforts to rebuild his reputation. He's also learned to live without Jessica, who filed for divorce the day after learning the truth about our family's finances. Apparently, the woman who'd spent years mocking my supposed financial ignorance couldn't handle being married to a man whose mother was worth $12 million that she'd never have access to. I got a letter from the treatment center yesterday, Marcus tells me. They want me to speak to new patients about family recovery, about how addiction affects everyone, not just the person gambling. What did you tell them? I told them I'd think about it. But honestly, Mom, I don't know if I'm ready to tell strangers about trying to steal from my own mother. You might be surprised how much good it could do, for them and for you. We sit in comfortable silence for a moment, looking around the living room that has become a symbol of our family's transformation. The photos are the same, but everything else feels different, lighter, more honest. Mom, can I ask you something I've been wondering about? Of course. If things had been different, if I'd never developed a gambling problem, if I'd been honest about my business struggles, if I'd treated you with respect after Dad died, would you have ever told me the truth about the money? It's a question I've asked myself many times over the past 6 months. I don't know, I admit. I'd like to think I would have eventually. But Marcus, I spent 40 years in the habit of hiding who I really was. It might have taken me years to break that pattern. Do you regret it? All those years of pretending? I consider this carefully. I regret that it taught you to undervalue women, especially your mother. I regret that it created unrealistic expectations about what marriage should look like. But do I regret protecting your father's pride and creating a stable, loving home for you to grow up in? No, I don't regret that. Marcus nods slowly. I've been thinking about that a lot in therapy. About how many women probably do the same thing, hide their strength to keep their families together. More than you'd imagine. It's not fair. No, it's not. But Marcus, fairness isn't the point. Love is the point. And sometimes love means making sacrifices that nobody ever knows about. I lean forward in my chair, but it also means knowing when to stop sacrificing and start demanding respect. The conversation is interrupted by my phone ringing. It's Harold, calling about a new client who needs help restructuring her finances after her husband's death. Another widow? Marcus asks after I hang up. Yes, her children are pressuring her to sell her home and move into assisted living. Sound familiar? Marcus winces. What are you going to do? I'm going to help her discover what she's really worth, financially and personally. Over the past 6 months, word has spread through Harold's network about Dorothy Whitfield's return to active financial consulting. I now have a waiting list of clients, mostly women, mostly widows, mostly people whose families have underestimated them for years. It turns out that 4 decades of hiding financial expertise while managing complex portfolios created a very specific skill set. I know how to help women discover their own power while navigating family dynamics that might resist that discovery. I've been thinking about something else too, Marcus says. About Dad. Do you think he really didn't know? About your business? About the money? About all of it? I think your father knew more than he admitted, even to himself. But Marcus, he was a product of his generation. Men were supposed to be providers. Women were supposed to be grateful recipients. Acknowledging that his wife was the real financial genius would have required him to question everything he'd been taught about masculinity. That seems sad. It was sad, for both of us. But it was also the best we could do with the tools we had at the time. As evening approaches, Marcus prepares to leave for his apartment, a modest 1-bedroom place he can afford on his bookkeeper's salary, without any help from me. Mom, I know I say this every time I see you, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry. Not just for the gambling or the stealing or bringing those criminals here. I'm sorry for 40 years of not seeing who you really were. And I'm sorry for 40 years of not showing you. He kisses my cheek and heads for the door, then turns back. Are you happy? I mean, really happy? I look around my beautiful home, thinking about my thriving consulting practice, my financial security, my recovered sense of self-worth, and my relationship with a son who finally sees me as a complete person. Marcus, I'm happier than I've been since I was 25 years old and thought I could conquer the world. Turns out you did conquer it, you just did it quietly. After he leaves, I pour myself a glass of wine and sit in my chair, watching the sunset through the windows of the house I chose, purchased, and paid for with money I earned through intelligence, hard work, and careful planning. My phone buzzes with a text from Detective Chen, updating me on the Morrison and Carter case. 3 more families have come forward with similar stories, and the federal investigation has expanded to include organized crime connections in 5 states. Another text comes from Margaret Thompson, congratulating me on a particularly successful investment recommendation I'd made for one of our mutual clients. A third text is from Dr. Peterson, Marcus's therapist, thanking me for agreeing to participate in his recovery process and telling me how proud she is of the progress we've both made. As I'm reading these messages, I realize something that would have seemed impossible a year ago. I am exactly where I belong, exactly who I'm supposed to be, at exactly the right time in my life. Dorothy Whitfield, the submissive housewife, was a character I played for 40 years. Dorothy Whitfield, the financial expert and empowered mother, is who I really am, and she's just getting started. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If this story touched you, please give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel. Stay healthy and value yourselves.